The glass shattered before I even realized I had dropped it. One second I was holding a champagne flute, smiling politely at the guests. The next, the sound of breaking glass echoed across the ballroom, sharp, final, and louder than the band playing in the corner. And just like that, my dignity shattered too, because right after the glass hit the floor, my daughter-in-law's voice cut through the air. "She's such an embarrassment to this family." Have you ever been humiliated in front of people you love? In front of strangers, too. 200 of them to be exact. Everyone turned their heads at once. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The music seemed to stumble and catch on itself. All I could hear was the pounding in my chest and Samantha's voice, clear, cold, and dripping with disdain. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I was 57, standing in a gold-trimmed ballroom in Manhattan, surrounded by chandeliers and flowers worth more than a year's rent in Queens, and I felt smaller than I ever had before. My cheeks burned. I wanted to disappear. I bent down quickly, trying to pick up the shards, to pretend the insult wasn't hanging in the air. But Samantha didn't stop. "She's always so awkward. I told you, David, she'd embarrass us one day. And look, she did it at our wedding. She won't look touch them." There it was again, loud, public, and worst of all, aimed not just at me, but at my son, David, her brand new husband, my only child. His face turned pale, as if the air had been sucked from the room. He opened his mouth, then closed it, torn between defending me and keeping the peace with his bride. Do you know that moment? That split second when the people you expect to stand up for you hesitate? It stings in a way you can't explain. It's not just about pride, it's about belonging. About whether you're still family or just a stranger holding onto a glass that's already slipped from your hands. I tried to stand tall. My dress rustled as I straightened up, the sequins catching the light. But no sparkle could cover how hollow I felt. I forced a laugh, small, shaky, like I was in on some private joke. Nobody laughed with me. The guests whispered. A woman in a sapphire dress leaned closer to her husband, her eyes flicking toward me with pity. A young man at the back took out his phone, not to check messages, but to capture the drama. Because humiliation spreads fast, faster than the music that finally stumbled back into rhythm. And in that instant, I wanted to ask Samantha the question that burned in my throat. Why? Why the cruelty? Why here? Why me? But I didn't. I bit my tongue so hard it almost bled. Because sometimes silence is safer than words, especially when you're surrounded. Here's the truth no one in that room knew. I wasn't the embarrassment. Not really. The real embarrassment was thinking I was powerless. And that night, as the glass lay in pieces at my feet, I made a silent promise. I would not stay powerless. But let's pause here for a moment. Because maybe you've been in my shoes. Maybe you felt the sting of being disrespected in front of others. Your voice swallowed, your dignity ignored. If you have, you know exactly what I felt standing there, with glass cutting into my fingertips. And if you haven't, stay with me, because what unfolded after that night didn't just change my family. It revealed truths no one expected, and it forced me to draw lines I had avoided for years. Sometimes, the sound of breaking glass is just the beginning. People see what they want to see. They saw a widow living in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens. They saw a woman who shopped at discount stores, who carried the same black handbag for 10 years, who never joined the conversation when talk turned to vacations in Paris or Hampton's beach houses. They saw less, but they were wrong. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible because people assume they've already figured you out? It's lonely. It's frustrating. And sometimes it's powerful, because invisibility can be a shield. After my husband died, I made a choice. I didn't want pity. I didn't want handouts. And I certainly didn't want anyone, not even my son, to look at me differently because of money. So I built a wall around my private life. Behind that wall, I worked. I studied markets, read late into the night, invested in places no one else in my circle paid attention to. I turned grief into strategy. And slowly, over 15 years, my life changed. Quietly. The Christine they underestimated was signing deals behind closed doors, watching dividends grow, moving pieces like a chess player who never shows her hand. Did it hurt sometimes? Keeping it all a secret, even from David? Yes. But if you've ever had something precious that you knew the world would only exploit, you'll understand. I was protecting him. Protecting myself. Flash back with me for a second. Picture a tiny kitchen, a stack of unpaid bills after my husband's funeral. I remember the smell of burnt coffee, because I'd reheated the same pot 3 times while staring at numbers I couldn't make sense of. I remember David, only 20, trying to be brave while asking if we'd lose the apartment. That night, I promised myself we never would. That night, something inside me hardened. People at church thought I was just Christine the quiet one. At PTA meetings, I was Christine the single mom. At weddings and birthdays, I was the woman who always left early because I wasn't comfortable. They didn't know I was leaving early to close trades on my laptop, to call brokers in different time zones, to fight for a future no one thought I could build. So when Samantha called me an embarrassment at her wedding, part of me wanted to laugh. If only she knew. If only any of them knew. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been so underestimated that it almost became an advantage? That was me. They dismissed me, and that gave me space to become someone they couldn't imagine. But secrets have a weight. In carry them too long, and they press down on you. Sometimes I would sit alone in my apartment, looking at the accounts, the numbers, the proof of everything I'd built, and wonder if silence was a kind of prison. If I had locked myself away in a cell made of spreadsheets and bank statements. Still, I chose silence. Because I knew how greed twists people. I had seen it when my husband was alive. Business partners circling like sharks, relatives asking for small favors that were never small. I didn't want David to grow up in that storm, so I let him believe I was just ordinary. And maybe I started to believe it too. Until that wedding night forced the truth to bubble closer to the surface than I ever wanted. I wasn't embarrassed. I was underestimated. And that's a dangerous mistake people make. Stay with me, because soon you'll see what happens when underestimation turns into confrontation. And trust me, it doesn't end the way they think. The first dinner after the wedding should have been warm, even joyful. Instead, it felt like walking into a room where someone had hidden a knife under the tablecloth. You couldn't see it, but you knew it was there, waiting. We sat around the polished oak table in David and Samantha's new apartment, the kind of place that screamed picture perfect. White walls, gold-framed art prints, a dining set that looked like it had been ordered straight from a glossy catalog. But perfect rooms can hold very imperfect conversations. David carved into the roast chicken with all the focus of a surgeon. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. I noticed the way his eyes flicked between me and Samantha, like he was bracing for impact. He didn't have to wait long. "So, Christine," Samantha began, smiling too wide. "I've always been curious. What exactly do you do with your time?" The words were casual on the surface, but the undertone was sharp, calculated. I kept my face calm, though inside I felt the familiar warning bells. Have you ever had someone ask you a question that felt like a test you never agreed to take? That was me, right then. I reached for my glass of water, buying a moment. I read. I cook. I take walks. I volunteer sometimes. Oh. She tilted her head, pretending to be impressed. That's nice. But how do you manage living in New York on just that? The silence after her words was heavy. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder. David cleared his throat, but he didn't step in. My fork hovered above my plate. I smiled politely, the way you do when someone draws blood in a room full of people and you refuse to show it hurts. You mean financially? I asked softly. Samantha didn't blink. Yes, I mean Manhattan isn't cheap. Queens isn't exactly free either. And you've been, what, on your own for 15 years now? She wanted me to stumble. She wanted me to reveal something, anything. What she didn't know was that silence had been my shield for so long it almost felt like armor. I get by, I said simply. Then I turned to David. This chicken is delicious, sweetheart. But Samantha wasn't finished. Predators rarely back off after the first strike. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes bright with something between curiosity and hunger. You must have had help, she pressed. Your husband left you something, right? An inheritance? For a second, the air froze. I felt David stiffen next to her, embarrassed by her boldness, but too entangled in loyalty to say anything. I looked at my son and realized with a pang that marriage had already shifted something in him, the balance of who he would defend first. Do you know that ache? Watching your child hesitate between you and their partner, it's like a quiet betrayal that isn't meant to be betrayal, but it cuts all the same. I set my fork down carefully, the clink against porcelain louder than it should have been. I manage my affairs privately, I said, keeping my tone light. Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. Of course. I think families should be open about these things. Don't you agree, David? David swallowed, avoiding my eyes. Let's just eat, he muttered. And there it was, the knife under the table, pressed just hard enough for me to feel the edge. The rest of dinner passed in strained small talk. The clatter of cutlery, the occasional forced laugh, the scraping of chairs. But underneath it all, I knew one thing. Samantha wasn't just curious. She was digging. And people who dig always believe there's treasure to be found. I wondered then, how long before my secret life, the one I had hidden for 15 years, became her obsession? Stay with me, because the questions she asked at that dinner were only the beginning. The real confrontation, the one that would change everything, was waiting just around the corner. It happened in a moment so small you could almost miss it, but I didn't. We were at another gathering, this time smaller, more formal. A family dinner with Samantha's side, crystal glasses, polished silverware. The kind of evening where people lower their voices as though secrets can't travel through porcelain and linen. I'd kept my head down most of the night, answering polite questions, smiling when I had to. Samantha's father, Robert, sat at the far end of the table. Distinguished man, sharp suit, a face carved by decades of boardroom battles. For most of the evening, he didn't look at me. Or maybe I didn't notice. But then, midway through the second course, I felt it. His eyes on me. And when I looked back, I saw recognition. Not the vague, I think I've met you somewhere kind. No, this was sharper. The kind of recognition that makes your chest tighten because you realize someone is flipping through old chapters of your life that you thought were locked away. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. The chatter around the table blurred. The clinking, the laughter, it all faded, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. Slow motion. Just me and him. Do you know that feeling when someone remembers a version of you that you've worked hard to bury? That was the moment. He leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't seeing Christine, the widow from Queens. He was seeing Christine, the silent figure in the boardroom 15 years ago when his company had been swallowed whole. Flashback. I can still see that room. A long mahogany table, men in suits arguing numbers, while my pen tapped quietly on the legal pad. They thought I was just another assistant. They never knew I was holding the strings behind the deal that dismantled Robert's empire piece by piece. And now, all these years later, here he was. The man whose signature trembled on the merger papers, staring at me from across the dinner table of his daughter's new life. He blinked once, slowly. His wine glass trembled slightly as he set it down. His wife chattered about summer homes in Vermont, oblivious. Samantha leaned in to whisper something to David, equally unaware. That Robert? Robert knew. Our eyes locked again, and I could almost hear the unspoken question, "What are you doing here?" I smiled faintly, as though nothing was unusual. But inside, my pulse quickened, because recognition is dangerous. If Robert connected the dots, if he told Samantha, if anyone realized who I really was, the walls I'd built for 15 years could crumble in an instant. He didn't say a word, not that night. But silence can scream louder than accusations. I left the dinner unsettled, my heels clicking against the marble lobby floor like a countdown clock. My mind spun. Had Samantha noticed her father's stare? Would Robert confront me later? Would my secret slip out, not because of me, but because of a man who had every reason to despise me? Let me ask you, have you ever seen recognition in someone's eyes and known that everything could change because of it? It's not fear, exactly. It's the awareness that the past doesn't stay buried forever. Stay close, because what Robert remembered that night wasn't just history. It was a fuse waiting to be lit. And once it burned down, the explosion would shake more than just one marriage. It started with a text, short, almost casual. "Christine, let's have lunch, just us, tomorrow." I stared at my phone longer than I should have. Samantha wasn't the type to extend invitations without an agenda, and just us, that was unusual. Still, I agreed. Maybe it was my curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet dread I felt in my stomach. Because sometimes when people frame something as innocent, you know it's anything but. The next day I arrived early, a quiet restaurant tucked away in Midtown Manhattan, white tablecloths, soft jazz humming from the speakers, waiters gliding like shadows. I took a seat by the window, watched taxis crawl down the street. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, a woman who had spent decades learning how to disappear. Samantha arrived exactly 5 minutes late, perfectly timed, enough to establish control. She leaned down, kissed my cheek and smiled wide, too wide. "Christine," she said, as if we were old friends. The waiter poured water. She ordered wine without asking if I wanted any. And then, after a few minutes of chatter about the weather, she got to it. "So," she said, tilting her head, "I've been doing some digging." Her words dropped like ice cubes into the glass between us. I didn't flinch. At least, not on the outside. But inside, my pulse kicked up. She slid a manila folder onto the table. Neat, precise, like she had rehearsed this moment. "I found some old photos," she continued. Articles, names that looked familiar. She pulled one sheet out and turned it toward me. A grainy photograph from a business magazine 15 years ago. A boardroom. Men in suits. And in the corner, me. Not the focus, not the headline, but visible enough for anyone determined to look. My throat tightened. "You were there, weren't you?" Samantha asked, her voice smooth. "Back when my father's company went under. The merger. The acquisition. You were part of it." Her eyes sparkled with something between triumph and accusation. I kept my voice steady. "I was in many rooms, Samantha. That doesn't mean anything." But she didn't stop. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "It means you've been hiding. It means you're not just David's mom living in a modest house in Queens. You're something else, someone else." The waiter returned with bread, and for a second the moment cracked. Polite smiles, thank yous, and then, as soon as he left, she pushed again. "You know," she said, tearing a piece of bread delicately, "it's not fair to keep secrets from family. We should all be honest about finances, about what resources are available." I almost laughed, almost, because there it was, the real reason for lunch. Not curiosity, not bonding, money. She wanted access. I took a sip of water, giving myself a moment. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm. "What exactly are you suggesting?" She shrugged, casual. "A trust. For the family. For David. For our future children. It's just smart. I mean, you've worked hard, I assume. Why keep it all hidden?" Why? Because secrecy had kept me safe. Because silence was my shield. Because every time people saw money, they stopped seeing me. And here was Samantha, smiling across the table, proving my point. Do you know that feeling when someone pretends they care about family, but what they're really staring at is the dollar signs in their imagination? That was the lunch. That was every word from her mouth. I didn't commit, I didn't deny, I let her talk. She showed me more clippings, printouts, even an old financial report. She had done her homework, or maybe her father had helped. But what struck me most wasn't the evidence. It was the hunger in her eyes. She didn't want a relationship, she wanted leverage. The lunch ended politely, as these things often do. Smiles, air kisses. Let's do this again. But as I walked out into the noise of the city, I felt the shift. Something irreversible had just happened. Because once someone shows you their cards, the greed, the calculation, you can't unsee it. And I knew then Samantha wasn't going to stop. She had caught the scent of money, and like a predator, once they taste it, they hunt until they're fed. So I ask you, if someone sat across from you, smiling sweetly while plotting how to carve up your life's work, what would you do? Would you confront them? Would you play along? Or would you wait, watch, and plan your move? Stay with me, because this lunch wasn't just awkward. It was the opening move of a much bigger game. And the real battle hadn't even started yet. The morning after that strange lunch with Samantha, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had been too prepared, too confident, like a prosecutor setting a trap. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my lawyer. His name is Michael Grant. Sharp mind, calm voice. The kind of man who never wastes a word. He'd represented me quietly for over a decade, helping me manage what was left after my husband passed. No one in my family knew, not even David. When he picked up, I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Michael," I said, "I think they're digging into me." He paused, then asked the question that always cuts to the heart. "Who's they?" "My daughter-in-law," I whispered, though I was alone in my kitchen. "And maybe her father," he sighed. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything you remember. We'll see what they're really playing at." The next day, I sat across from him in his office. It was sleek polished wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, the faint hum of the city below, and yet, as the door closed, it felt like a confessional booth. I laid out the lunch conversation, the photos, the folder, the insinuations. Michael listened, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on me. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "They're circling you," he said. "But if she's digging into you, Christine, you have every right to dig into her." That thought hadn't crossed my mind. For so long, I had been in defense mode. Protect, conceal, endure. But offense? That was new. Michael made a few calls, discreet, professional, the kind that never leave a paper trail. Within a week, the files came in, thick, heavy, a box of paper that smelled faintly of toner and dust. I remember running my hand across the top before opening it, like touching the lid of a coffin. And inside, the Mitchells weren't what they pretended to be. On the surface, their life was glittering. The Hamptons house, the luxury cars, Samantha's designer gowns. But beneath it, cracks everywhere. Credit lines stretched to the breaking point. Mortgages stacked like cards in a tower. Investments bleeding red. They weren't wealthy. They were drowning. Every dollar they flaunted was borrowed. Every smile at those high society parties was paid for with debt. I flipped through page after page, tax liens, lawsuits quietly settled, a foreclosure notice buried in a pile. It was like watching a stage set collapse. The perfect backdrop peeled away to reveal rotten beams. And the worst part? David didn't know. That realization punched me harder than anything Samantha had said at lunch. My son, my only child, was walking blindfolded into quicksand. I sat there in Michael's office, the city buzzing outside, and for the first time in years, I felt something burn in my chest. Not shame, not fear, anger. Have you ever seen the truth about someone so stark and undeniable that you almost gasp out loud? That was me holding those papers. Because here's what it meant. Samantha hadn't married my son out of love. She'd married him as a lifeboat, a ticket, a safety net woven from my silence and my savings. Michael slid the final sheet toward me. A personal loan application from Samantha herself, signed just a month before the wedding. The number was obscene, and the collateral, non-existent. "She's desperate," Michael said softly. "Desperate people do dangerous things." I stared at the signature, Samantha Mitchell. Curved letters, bold flourish, the handwriting of someone who had never been told no. I realized in that moment I wasn't just protecting myself, I was protecting my son. And maybe that's the cruel irony. She called me an embarrassment at her wedding. But who was the real embarrassment? The woman hiding her wealth, living quietly, or the family building castles on sand? I walked out of Michael's office that evening with a copy of the file under my arm. The sky was turning pink over Manhattan. Crowds rushed past, chasing trains, chasing taxis, chasing lives. But me? I wasn't rushing anymore. I was waiting, watching, planning. Because if Samantha thought I was weak, if she thought I'd fold under pressure, she was about to learn the truth. And trust me, when someone underestimates you, that's their first mistake. So let me ask you, if you uncovered that the people who judged you, mocked you, even tried to use you, were secretly crumbling inside, what would you do with that knowledge? Would you confront them immediately, or would you hold it like a weapon until the right moment to strike? Stay with me, because the moment I chose, that was when everything changed. There's a particular kind of silence that tells you someone is watching. Have you ever felt it? That prickling on the back of your neck, the way shadows in a room feel heavier than they should? That's exactly how it started. Someone leading. At first, I thought it was paranoia. After all, I had just uncovered Samantha's family's mountain of debt. Maybe my nerves were raw. Maybe I was jumping at ghosts. But then, the little signs piled up. A black car parked across from my building. Same spot, same tinted windows. 2 days in a row, then 4. An envelope slipped under my door. Empty. No name, no return address, just the faintest scent of cologne. And one afternoon, while sipping coffee at the corner cafe, I caught a man in a suit snapping a photo of me. He didn't even try to hide it. Our eyes met. He smiled, then walked away. That was when I knew. Samantha wasn't just playing games at the lunch table anymore. She had escalated. I called Michael again. He wasn't surprised. "She's hired someone," he said flatly. "Private investigator, maybe more." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew. "To prove what she thinks you're hiding, or to scare you. Either way, Christine, this isn't about curiosity anymore. It's about leverage." The words sat between us like poison. Leverage. For days I moved like a ghost in my own life, curtains drawn, phone off. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the echo of my own breath. I hated the way it made me feel. Cornered. But then one night, lying awake, I remembered something my husband used to say back when we sat in boardrooms. If they're watching you, it means you're holding the cards they want. That flipped a switch inside me. Why was I hiding? Why was I letting them stalk me like prey? No, if Samantha wanted to play a shadow game, then I'd learn to play it better. The next week, I started keeping records of my own. Dates, times, photos snapped from my phone of the same car, the same stranger. Michael connected me with a retired investigator, someone who owed him a favor. We met in a diner at midnight, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. "Name's Harris," he said, sliding into the booth. "You've got someone tailing you?" "Yes," I said, "but I don't want to just know who, I want to know why," Harris grinned. "Now that's the right question." Within days, he confirmed it. Samantha had hired a team, lawyers to comb through my past, investigators to dig through my trash, my mail, my phone records. She wanted proof of the fortune I had buried. But here's the twist. When Harris dug deeper, he found something else, something she didn't want me to know. Samantha wasn't just investigating me. She was planning to build a legal case. A claim of financial non-disclosure within marriage. In plain words, she wanted grounds to sue me, to drag my son into it, to argue that my silence about my assets was a form of fraud against her future. Can you imagine? A daughter-in-law, weeks after the wedding, already lining up lawyers to bleed her husband's family dry? I remember staring at Harris across that diner booth, my spoon clinking against the ceramic cup. "So she wants war," I said softly. He shrugged. "Looks that way." But that was when I stopped feeling like a victim. Because war is only scary if you don't know the battlefield. And boardrooms, deals, negotiations under pressure, that was my home turf. Still, I played my part carefully. I smiled at family dinners. I nodded through conversations. I let Samantha believe I was oblivious. But inside, I was cataloging everything. The hesitation in her voice when David asked about her family's business. The way she changed the subject when Robert mentioned his failed ventures. The slight crack in her polished exterior when a bill arrived at a restaurant. And meanwhile, Michael and Harris worked quietly with me, gathering, stacking, preparing. Because when you play in the shadows, the one with the sharpest memory wins. But here's the real bombshell. The moment I discovered what Samantha had actually told her father about me, it wasn't just that I was wealthy. She had painted me as unstable, manipulative, dangerous, a woman who would cut off her son if he didn't obey. And that lie, that was the fuse. Because if she was willing to twist my silence into cruelty, then she wasn't just attacking me, she was weaponizing my son's love against me. And that, more than the lawsuits, more than the threats, was what I couldn't forgive. So, I decided, no more waiting, no more hiding. If Samantha wanted to drag me into the light, then I'd make sure the spotlight revealed her. Stay with me, because the next move I made wasn't just defense. It was the strike that turned the game upside down. And trust me, you'll want to see her face when the truth hit her. I chose the place carefully. A quiet dining room, late evening, when the chatter of the city dulled into background hum. Candles flickered low, silverware clinked faintly in the distance. If war was going to be declared, I wanted it on neutral ground. No wedding dresses, no family tables, just truth. Samantha arrived with that polished smile of hers, the one she wore like armor. Red lipstick. A little too perfect. Heels that struck the marble floor like gunshots. She thought she was walking into another casual dinner, another chance to circle me, to extract information. But this time, I wasn't prey. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Sit down." She arched an eyebrow, suspicious but curious she sat, and then slowly I placed the folder on the table between us. Manila, worn at the edges, the kind of folder that smells like secrets. Her eyes flickered just for a moment, but I saw it, the panic beneath the gloss. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. She tried to laugh. "Christine, you really don't have to dramatize everything." I slid the folder open. Photographs spilled out. grainy shots of men tailing me, invoices from the PI she had hired, even copies of her own text messages arranging surveillance. Harris had done his job well. The silence was sharp like broken glass. "Why?" I whispered. My voice shook, not from fear but from the sheer weight of betrayal. "You married my son, and within weeks you hired strangers to follow me, to dig through my life, to paint me as unstable." Her jaw tightened. I had to protect myself. I need to know who I'm really dealing with.
I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving hers. "Protect yourself from what, Samantha? From a mother who kept her grief private? From a woman who never asked you for a dime?" She didn't answer, so I asked the question that had been burning inside me.
The one that split the air like thunder. "Do you love my son? Or the money?" For the first time, she froze. Her mouth opened, closed. She blinked, buying seconds, but seconds betray liars. "Of course I love David," she said finally, her tone icy. "But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't secure futures. Money does." There it was, naked, unapologetic. I pushed the folder closer to her. "These men you hired, these lawyers you whispered to, they won't secure your future, Samantha. They'll ruin it. And if you think you can twist my silence into some kind of fraud, you've underestimated me," she scoffed, but her hand trembled as she gathered the photos. "You think you can scare me with this? I'm not afraid of you." But I smiled then. And maybe it was the smile of a woman who had spent years in boardrooms, signing deals worth millions, watching men twice her size flinch, because Samantha flinched too. "You should be," I said quietly. "Because I've survived worse than you. And because I don't fight to win. I fight to end." For a moment, all I could hear was the clock on the wall, ticking like a countdown. And I thought of David, my son who had looked at me with suspicion after she whispered lies. My son who believed in her innocence. This wasn't just about wealth. It was about the fracture she had driven into my family, the wedge she had hammered with practiced precision. So I laid it bare. "I don't care if you insult me. I don't care if you think I'm old or strange, but when you manipulate David into thinking his mother is untrustworthy, that's when you cross the line." Her mask slipped then. For the briefest second, I saw the real Samantha, cold, calculating, a predator who had finally been seen for what she was. She gathered her things, stood abruptly. "This conversation is over." But I didn't stop her, because sometimes the silence you leave someone with is louder than any word. As she walked away, heels echoing down the empty hall, I sat there breathing, chest heavy. The trail is a strange thing. It burns, yes, but it also clarifies. It shows you exactly who belongs in your life and who never did. And though the room was quiet, I could almost hear my husband's voice from years ago. In business, betrayal is inevitable, but in family, it's unforgivable. That night I knew. Samantha hadn't just married into my family. She had infiltrated it. But she had underestimated me, and if you think this confrontation was intense, wait until you see what she did next, the lengths she was willing to go, and how I answered her. That's where the real storm begins. I should have known Samantha wouldn't retreat. Predators rarely do. They don't run from confrontation, they escalate. And that's exactly what she did. A week after our confrontation, I got the letter. Heavy envelope, expensive paper, my name typed in bold at the top. When I slid it open, the words jumped out like snakes. Allegations, fraud, SEC, litigation. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just threatening me socially anymore. She was moving onto legal ground. We sat across a long mahogany table in a downtown office. The air smelled like leather and ink, the kind of place where fortunes rise and reputations collapse. On one side, me, with Harris, my lawyer, calm, focused, a notepad, a pen, nothing more. On the other side, Samantha and her attorney, a slick man in a navy suit, cufflinks glinting like little weapons. He spoke first, voice oily smooth. Mrs. Mitchell, my client has reason to believe you've concealed assets, potential violations of disclosure, possibly insider activity. I almost laughed. Insider activity? I'd spent 15 years building walls around my finances, keeping everything clean, airtight. But I didn't laugh. I let him talk. Because sometimes silence is stronger than rebuttal. Samantha leaned back in her chair, arms folded, eyes locked on me. She wasn't here for truth. She was here for intimidation. Harris slid the letter across the table, his tone cutting.
These claims are baseless.
There is no obligation for a private widow to disclose assets to her daughter-in-law. None. And if you want to drag this into court, we will gladly request discovery on your finances. The shift was immediate. I saw it flicker across her face. The 1-second crack in her mask. Discovery meant exposure. Exposure meant the world would see just how much debt her family was drowning in. But Samantha didn't fold. No, she doubled down. If you think you can scare me, she said coldly, you're wrong. David deserves to know the truth. And if that truth comes with consequences, so be it. Do you hear the manipulation in that? She wasn't fighting for her. She was framing it as if she was fighting for my son, twisting his name into her arsenal. That cut deeper than any legal threat. For a second, I flashed back. David at 8 years old, clutching my hand after his father's funeral, his little voice whispering, "It's just us now, Mom." And now, here he was, a man caught between a mother and a wife who weaponized love. I felt anger burn my throat. I leaned forward, my voice low. Samantha, you can threaten me with letters, with lawyers, with the SEC itself. But let's be clear. You are not protecting David. You are protecting your access to my money. And if you try to use the law as your weapon, then you will learn very quickly that I don't lose in courtrooms. The lawyer cleared his throat, trying to diffuse. Perhaps we can reach some sort of arrangement. There it was. Not law, not justice, an arrangement, which meant this wasn't about crimes. This was about leverage. I sat back, exhaling slowly. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed still. Have you ever been in a room where you realize the game isn't about truth anymore, but about who blinks first? That was this moment. Samantha wanted to push me into a corner, to make me panic, to make me cut a deal. But here's the thing about traps. Once you see them, they lose their power. Harris whispered in my ear, "We could counterfile. Public record. Her debts will surface." I looked across at Samantha. Her nails tapped the table, steady. But her foot was bouncing beneath the chair. She was nervous. She was bluffing. And suddenly, the fear that had been gripping my chest loosened. She wasn't holding cards. She was holding smoke. I stood, slowly, gathered my notepad. "This meeting is over," I said calmly. "You want to drag me into court? Do it. But remember, sunlight doesn't just burn me. It burns you too." The room went quiet. Even the air conditioning hum seemed to pause. I turned and walked out. My heels echoed down the marble hallway, each step louder than the last. I didn't need to look back to know Samantha's mask had slipped again. That night I sat alone in my kitchen. The house was dark, only the glow of the city outside the window. And for the first time, I admitted to myself, I wasn't just dealing with a greedy daughter-in-law. I was in a war. A legal war, a psychological war. A war for my son's loyalty. And in wars like these, one wrong move can cost everything. But here's the thing. I don't play to survive. I play to end. If you think this legal trap was the climax, you're wrong. What came next would make lawsuits look like child's play. And the choice I put on the table, it changed everything. Stay with me, because the ultimatum was coming. And it wasn't just numbers on a page. It was $5 million and the cost of a marriage. Some battles end with words. Others end with silence. But this one demanded a price. I remember the moment clearly. The room was dim, the heavy curtains drawn to block the city glare. Samantha sat across from me, her expression sharp as glass. Her lawyer was at her side, a stack of folders ready like weapons. And David, my son, hovered near the door, torn between two worlds. I let the quiet stretch. Silence is powerful, you know. People rush to fill it, but not me. I'd learned long ago in boardrooms, whoever speaks first loses ground. Finally, Samantha snapped. You can't just ignore this. You've hidden money. You've lied to your own son. If this goes public, if the SEC investigates, your reputation will burn. Her voice trembled just slightly. Enough for me to know she wasn't as steady as she wanted to appear. I leaned forward, folded my hands, and then, with the calmest tone I've ever managed in my life, I said, $5 million. Her eyes widened. What? You heard me, I said. $5 million. Cash, clean, wired to you. You take it, and you walk away from this family forever. You divorce David. You never come near my son again. You disappear.
The room shifted. Even the air seemed to tighten.
My lawyer's pen froze mid-scribble. David gasped softly, his knuckles white around the doorframe. Samantha blinked twice. Then she laughed, a high, sharp sound. You think you can buy me out like some unwanted stock? Yes, I said simply. Because that's exactly what you are, a toxic asset. And the sooner we liquidate, the better for everyone. She tried to sneer, but her lips trembled. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear. She shook him off, leaning forward. You can't control me like this. David loves me. He'll never accept your deal. And that's when I looked at my son. Really looked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was broken. His shoulders slumped, his eyes downcast, a man realizing the foundation of his marriage was crumbling. I wanted to cry, but instead, I steadied my voice. David, you deserve the truth. Love that has to be bought with lawsuits and blackmail, it isn't love at all. It's a transaction, and I refuse to let my son's life become someone else's business deal. The silence after that was brutal. You could hear the tick of the clock on the wall. Finally, Samantha's chair screeched back. She stood towering over me, rage radiating off her. You think you can win, don't you? Throw money at me and I'll just disappear? I met her gaze unflinching. It's not about winning. It's about protecting my son. $5 million is more than generous for someone who married for profit. You walk away with money you didn't earn, or you stay, and I dismantle every facade you've built, your debts, your lies, all of it, exposed. Her breathing quickened. She looked at David, then back at me. You were cruel. No, I said softly. I'm a mother. And in that moment, the power shifted. For months, she had been pulling the strings, twisting narratives, threatening reputations, but with one sentence, one ultimatum, I had cut the strings. Because here's the truth. Power isn't always about money. It's about who's willing to walk away without fear. I slid a folder across the table. Inside documentation, wire transfer instructions, legal clauses airtight enough to hold in court. You have 7 days, I told her. After that, the offer vanishes. And so does my patience. Her hand hovered over the folder, but she didn't touch it. She glared at me, then stormed out, her lawyers scrambling to follow. The slam of the door rattled the glass on the table. And just like that, the game had changed. David stayed behind, silent. His eyes searched mine, filled with questions he wasn't ready to ask. And I didn't push. Sometimes truth needs time to settle. I stood gathering my papers. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. Inside, though, relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had taken control of the narrative. But here's the thing. Ultimatums don't just end stories. They ignite them. If you think it ends here, wait until you see what choice she makes. There are conversations that feel like knives, not loud, not violent, just sharp enough to cut you open without warning. David asked Samantha to meet him alone. No lawyers, no parents, no audience. Just the two of them in their apartment, the one filled with gifts from their wedding registry, photos that already felt like lies. I wasn't there, but I didn't have to be. When David came to me afterward, his face told the whole story. His eyes were red, his voice raw. And when he repeated their conversation, every word etched itself into my memory. He said it began quietly. Samantha was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, acting like nothing had happened. Like the $5 million ultimatum I had laid down was just smoke, not fire. David sat across from her. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse. He just asked, softly, "Would you still love me if my mother had nothing? If there was no money?" The question hung in the air. He told me. She froze for a second, then she forced a laugh. "Why would you even ask something like that?"
But David pressed. His voice cracked when he said it again.
"Tell me the truth, Sam. If we had nothing, just debts, just each other, would you still be here?"
Silence.
Heavy, suffocating silence. He said she avoided his eyes. She fiddled with her ring, staring at the diamond like it might give her the answer. And then, in the quietest voice, she whispered, "I don't know." Not yes, not of course, not always, just, "I don't know." David told me that in that moment, it felt like the floor gave out beneath him. The vows they had exchanged, the promises whispered in the dark, it all cracked like glass. He said his chest felt hollow, like he was sitting across from a stranger. And then, almost defensively, Samantha added, "Love doesn't pay bills, David. You think feelings are enough to keep us afloat? Reality doesn't work that way." David, he didn't respond. He just sat there, listening to the sound of his marriage collapsing in real time. When he finished telling me, he put his head in his hands. He didn't cry, not exactly. But the stillness in him was worse. A man grieving not a death, but a betrayal. And I couldn't stop thinking, marriages are supposed to be priceless. But in that living room, it had a price tag, and Samantha had just admitted it. Have you ever watched someone you love realize they were never truly loved back? It's a pain that echoes. It's quiet, but it lingers. For David, that moment wasn't just about Samantha, it was about trust, about discovering that what he thought was a foundation was only sand. And for me, it was confirmation. The $5 million wasn't just an ultimatum, it was a mirror. And she had shown exactly who she was when she couldn't even say yes to the simplest question. Later that night, David sat with me at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. His silence told me everything. When he finally spoke, it was almost a whisper. "It feels like my marriage is for sale." And I placed my hand over his. "It always was, son. You just couldn't see the price tag until now." That was the moment I knew. Something had ended. Not officially, not legally, but spiritually, emotionally. Because once love is questioned, once doubt takes root, there's no going back to innocence. The cracks were there, and soon the break would come. Sometimes the most painful truth isn't screamed, it's whispered. And sometimes the end of a marriage isn't signed in court, it's signed in silence. But if you think the silence was final, wait until you hear what happened at 11:47. There are moments in life when time stops meaning minutes and starts meaning endings. For me, that moment came at 11:47 on a Thursday morning. The clock on the conference room wall ticked louder than usual, as if it knew what was about to happen. The room smelled like polished wood and burnt coffee. The lawyers were already there, their briefcases open, papers stacked neatly, pens lined up like weapons. David sat on my right, pale, his hand trembling as it tapped against the table. Across from us, Samantha. Perfect hair, perfect lipstick, eyes cold as glass. She didn't look at David, not once. She stared at the documents in front of her, scanning line by line, like she was buying a car, not selling her marriage. Do you know what betrayal looks like on paper? Black ink on white sheets. A signature line at the bottom. That was it. Years of love, trust, vows, shrunk down to 4 pages and 1 pen. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're ready when you are, Mrs. Mitchell." Mrs. Mitchell? The title that had meant something only weeks ago? Now it sounded hollow. David finally spoke. His voice was soft, like he already knew the answer but had to ask anyway. "Sam, are you really going through with this?" She didn't hesitate, not even a flicker of doubt. $5 million is more than enough. That sentence, it was colder than any scream. She might as well have said, "You were never enough." David leaned back, his shoulders caving in, like the weight of her words pressed him into the chair. And me? My stomach turned. Because in that instant I realized the ultimatum I had set wasn't just a test, it was a purchase. And she was ready to sell. Scratched against the paper, one signature, then another. She paused before the final line, adjusting her ring, smirking slightly as though she had won something I wanted to shout, to snatch the paper away, to tell her that money doesn't erase the scars she had already carved into my family, but I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is louder than words. And then, 11:47, the second hand clicked forward. Samantha pressed the pen down. Her name flowed across the last line, looping, confident, final. The lawyer gathered the papers quickly, almost businesslike, as though we hadn't just watched a marriage collapse in real time. He stacked them neatly, clipped them together, and said, "It's done." Done. What a brutal word. David turned his head away. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't look at me either. His jaw tightened, his chest rose and fell, but no tears came. Sometimes grief is too heavy for tears. Samantha stood. She didn't even say goodbye. She didn't apologize. She just smoothed her skirt, picked up her purse, and walked out of the room, high heels clicking against marble floors, echoing like a countdown that had just reached 0. And here's the strange part. I didn't feel triumph. Not really. I felt empty. Yes, I had protected my son. Yes, I had saved the fortune his father and I had built. But what's the price of victory when it comes wrapped in heartbreak? David's marriage didn't just end, it was sold. At 11:47, love had $1 value. And that is the kind of wound you don't forget. Have you ever watched someone realize that the person they trusted most valued money over them? That was David in that chair, and me, sitting beside him, helpless to undo it. Later, when we stepped out of that building, the sky was gray, heavy with rain. David stopped on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. People walked past us, rushing to work, carrying coffee cups, living their normal lives. And here we were, 2 people who had just watched a chapter close in the cruelest way. He finally whispered, almost to himself, "At least now I know the truth." And I put my arm around him, steadying him, because even in relief, the truth still stings. The deal was signed at 11:47, but its shadow will last much longer. If you think the story ends with the signature, wait until you see what happens after the storm. Grief doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it sits quiet, heavy, like fog after a storm. That's what it felt like in the days after the papers were signed. David moved back into the house he grew up in, my house, his father's house. He carried only 2 suitcases, a box of books, and silence that filled every corner of the hallway. The first night, I heard him pacing in his old bedroom. The same floorboards creaked the same way they had when he was a teenager sneaking back in past curfew. Except now, there was no mischief in his footsteps, only loss. I wanted to talk, to hold him, to say you're not alone in this, but do you know how hard it is to reach out to someone when their pain is still raw? You're afraid one word might make them shatter. So instead, I made coffee, strong, black, the way his father used to drink it. The next morning, I placed the mug in front of him at the kitchen table. He stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "It smells like Dad." That was the first time his eyes softened in days. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes in small, unexpected ways, like watching an old movie on a rainy afternoon. Like laughing at a memory you swore you'd forgotten. Like realizing someone you trusted didn't define your worth after all. One evening, I found David sitting on the back porch. He was staring at the garden, where the roses had started to bloom again. He didn't notice me at first, then he spoke, low, shaky. I keep asking myself, how did I not see it? How did I not know she only wanted the money? I sat beside him. Because you loved her, David. And when you love someone, you don't scan them for lies, you trust. That's not weakness, that's being human. He nodded slowly. His jaw tightened, then loosened. For the first time, I saw him let go of the anger and sit with the grief instead. And that was progress. Flashback hit me then. 15 years earlier, after his father's funeral, David had been the one who sat on this same porch, refusing to cry, refusing to speak.
I brought him tea that time. He hadn't taken a sip.
But he had leaned his head against my shoulder. And now, here we were again. The same porch, the same ache, different storm. Some days were harder than others. I won't pretend otherwise. There were mornings when David wouldn't come down for breakfast, when the sound of silence at the table almost broke me. But little by little, he started opening up. One night, over leftover pasta, he said, "Mom, thank you for protecting Dad's legacy, for protecting me, even when I didn't understand." Those words, God, they lifted something off my chest I didn't even realize I was carrying. Because the truth is, I had doubted myself. I'd asked, did I go too far? Did I make the right call? But hearing him say that, it mattered more than anything. Healing is messy. It isn't cinematic. It's not one big epiphany. It's 100 little ones spread out across weeks. Like the first time you laughed again, really laughed. We were cooking dinner together and I accidentally spilled flour all over myself. He chuckled, then covered his face, embarrassed by the sound of joy coming out of him. That laugh was more precious to me than any settlement, any number in a bank account. You know what's strange? Storms feel endless when you're inside them. But once they pass, the air is clearer, the sky seems wider, and you start noticing the things you almost forgot to appreciate. One Sunday, David and I went through old photo albums. He flipped to a picture of his wedding day. Samantha was smiling wide, perfect for the camera, but he stared past her, at the corner of the frame where his father and I were laughing. "That's the real love," he whispered. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just mourning what he lost, he was remembering what was possible. If you've ever been through heartbreak, you know this. The storm will convince you it's the end. But after, when the quiet comes, you see it was only a chapter, not the whole story. David's healing didn't mean forgetting Samantha, it meant choosing not to let her define the rest of his life. And my healing? It meant forgiving myself for all the ways I couldn't protect him sooner. That week he filed for divorce. Final. Official. There was no celebration, just relief. Bitter, quiet relief. We didn't toast. We didn't mark the date. Instead, we sat on the porch again, sipping coffee, watching the roses sway in the wind. And for the first time, the silence wasn't heavy, it was gentle. After the storm, life didn't go back to normal. It grew into something new, stronger, softer, more honest. And if you think healing ends here, wait until you see who walks into his life next. Sunday dinners have always carried a kind of weight in my family. They're not just about food. They're about gathering, pausing, breathing together after a long week. For months, though, the table had been too quiet, too empty, too heavy. But then came Sarah. It was David who asked if he could bring someone over. His voice was careful, tentative, like a child asking permission. "She's different, Mom. I want you to meet her." Different. That word echoed in my chest. After everything, after the storm, after the betrayal and the silence, different was all I wanted for him. I said yes, of course, but I'll admit my stomach twisted all week. Who was she? What did she want? Would I see that same hungry glint I'd seen before, or something gentler? The doorbell rang at exactly 6. I wiped my hands on the apron, heart racing faster than it should have for a simple Sunday dinner. When I opened the door, there she was, Sarah. A soft smile, hair pulled back simply, no sparkle, no diamonds, a modest dress in pale blue. She carried a pie in her hands, apple, the kind you can smell before you even step inside. "Miss Bennet," she said warmly, "thank you for having me. I am not Christine the investor, not the woman with hidden millions, just Mrs. Bennet." I can't explain why, but that alone made me breathe easier. Dinner was roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Nothing fancy, but Sarah treated it like it was a feast. She asked about the recipe, laughed when David teased her for going back for seconds, told us little stories about her students because she was a teacher. A teacher. That one detail alone changed everything for me. You know why? Because teachers don't count wealth in dollars. They count it in faces, in light bulb moments, in patience. I found myself listening closer, watching her more carefully, the way she leaned toward David when he spoke, not to interrupt, but to hear him better. The way she laughed, not polite, not rehearsed, but the kind of laugh that shakes out of you when you're caught off guard. And most of all, the way David looked at her. Do you know that look? The one that isn't desperate or needy or defensive? The one that's simply at peace? That was on my son's face for the first time in years. At one point, Sarah put down her fork and said, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but David talks about you all the time. How strong you are, how much he's learned from you." I blinked hard. Compliments are easy to give, but the way she said it, quiet, without performance, without an audience, it felt honest. And then she added, "I think he gets his stubbornness from you, though." David groaned. I laughed for the first time that evening. And just like that, the heaviness at the table lifted. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself to the kitchen, just to breathe, to take it in, to remind myself that this was real. Standing there, leaning against the counter, I thought, have you ever been so used to bracing for impact that you forget what it feels like to relax? That was me. For years, I had been holding my breath around whoever my son brought close, but tonight, for the first time, I let it out. Later, as Sarah helped me wash dishes, I asked her quietly, "Do you know what you're walking into?" "My son, he carries scars." She nodded, "So do I. That's why I don't expect perfection. I just want to walk with him wherever it goes." There it was, simple, no performance, no agenda, just presence. When they left that night, David kissed my cheek. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. His hand lingered on my shoulder, steady, grateful. After they walked out the door, I looked back at the dining table. The plates were empty, the candles burned low, but the air in the room was different, lighter, hopeful. You know, storms teach you to appreciate quiet skies. The trail makes you value honesty in the smallest of gestures. That Sunday dinner wasn't just about meeting someone new. It was about remembering that love, the real kind, isn't loud or flashy. It's steady, it's gentle, and it doesn't care about your bank account. If you've ever been through loss, you'll know this. The heart does find its way back to hope, sometimes in the most ordinary places, like a Sunday dinner. And if you think this story has nothing left to give, wait until you hear the final lesson it taught me. You know, When you survive a storm that nearly tears your family apart, you don't walk away unchanged.
You carry scars, but you also carry clarity.
And if there's one thing this journey carved deep into me, it's this. Respect cannot be bought. Money can buy freedom, but never dignity. I used to think keeping my wealth hidden was about safety, protecting my son from greed,
Shielding myself from vultures.
and in a way, it worked. For years, people underestimated me. They thought I was small, powerless, invisible. But here's the truth. You can't hide forever. Eventually, life forces you to step into the light. And when I did, when Samantha called me an embarrassment at her own wedding, that was the moment everything cracked wide open. But it also showed me something I hadn't wanted to face. Money doesn't just tempt outsiders. It can rot relationships from the inside if you let it. I keep remembering one night years ago, after my husband passed. David was still a teenager, sitting at the kitchen table with a broken basketball shoe. He asked me if we could afford a new pair. I smiled, told him no, not right now, but maybe next month. What he didn't know was that I could have bought him 10 pairs on the spot.
But I wanted him to grow up with grit, not entitlement.
That memory haunts me now, but also comforts me. Because grit, real grit, is what carried him through. Not the bank account, not the safety net. So what did I learn? That love twisted by money isn't love at all. That being underestimated isn't always a curse. It's sometimes your sharpest weapon. And that giving someone a fortune to walk away isn't weakness, but a declaration of power. Because you are choosing peace over pride. And maybe most importantly, I learned that betrayal inside a family doesn't define you. It wounds you, yes. It breaks you, yes. But it doesn't erase your worth. People ask me, Christine, do you regret giving her the money? Let me answer you directly. No, I don't. Because that payment wasn't for her. It was for my son. For me. For the freedom to finally close the chapter and start a new one. If I had refused, if I had dragged this into court, into headlines, into years of bitterness, I would have lost more than dollars. I would have lost time. And time, my friends, is the only currency that never replenishes. So here's my advice. From one bruised but unbroken heart to yours. Protect your dignity like it's sacred. Share your wealth carefully. And never confuse generosity with obligation. Because respect, that's not for sale. And if someone tries to auction your dignity, you walk away. Now let me leave you with a question, one I've asked myself many nights, and one I want you to think about too. Would you have given her the money or nothing at all? Tell me. Because maybe your answer says less about Samantha and more about you.